You all are here to listen to us today. I'm going to hand over the mic to Pramila first. She's going to give you a little introduction to the Cochini Jews and read some of her poems. And then I'll give you a little bit of background history on the Ben Israel Jews and read my work. So I hope you enjoy this session. Books are available at the bookstore. We'll be there afterwards. Thanks so much. Go ahead, Pramila.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you to the Bangalore Literary Festival for inviting us. And I'm really happy to be here. I grew up in Cochin as a child, and my father's family comes from Kerala. So when I started writing about my childhood memories, the synagogue and living next to the synagogue inevitably entered my whatever I was writing, whether it was poems or prose narratives. And as an adult, of course, I kept going back to Cochin because many of my relatives live in Kerala. And as I kept writing, I ended up with many poems that formed this book, which is called We Are Not a Museum, The Jews of Kochi. And so this book is a result of a combination of my research as well as my imagination, where I pieced together several parts of history and anthropology and my own imaginative recreations. The foundational story of the Jews in Cochin is that of exile. And so the first strand of Jews that came into Cochin was in the 1st century AD. And if you ask many of the Jews who live, at least a few of the Jews who now live there, they'll tell you that they've been there since the time of Solomon or after the destruction of the Second Temple. So basically, you have to imagine that the Jews arrived there between the 1st and 3rd century AD. And then there was a second strand of Jews that migrated to Cochin, and that was after the Spanish Inquisition of the 15th century. And that was by sea route. So anthropologists talk about how the original Jews, the Malabari Jews, who came between the 1st and 3rd century, actually came through Iran and Afghanistan and came down all the way into Kerala. So anyway, I don't want to go into all of that, but I would like to read you my opening poems, which talks about the foundational idea of exile. Exile. Coming is always arduous. Mountains, near-death escapades, until you chalk a square space and call it home. Going happens in a split second, a bird taking wing. Once exiled from Palestine, it is hard to bear yet another exile, even if winds are fair. We have left a door open in Kerala. Its lit interior welcomes our mornings. We turn east as once we turned toward Jerusalem. The long journey. 1. She bundled everything they owned: 2 skirts, 2 blouses, a loaf of bread, dried olives, figs, some meat, a square cloth, 2 bowls, Joseph's robe, the family Bible, and a small sack of earth to remind them where they came from. 2. The earth carried the smell of trees, the light of the moon under which she prayed, the sound of water. She heard it call, "Come back." Centuries later, her progeny heeded its call. 3. Hear her say, just the rocking of the body, a boat on the waters, whisper of prayers, a slight wind will us to live that day and sleep without a care, just to find a place to call on Yahweh, to enfold us, keeps us full. So in these 2 poems, you sort of get the idea about exile, moving from one place to another. The theme of migration, I think part of me, because of my own migration, I think I reflect upon what is it that we keep when we move from one place to another. When you enter the Cochin synagogue, what you see are the paintings in the Cochin synagogue. And so I wrote a poem called Triptych, which captures the paintings in the Cochin synagogue. And what's interesting about paintings is that because they capture the history, they tell even more than what you could read in a history textbook. So again, I used poetic images to capture those paintings. So these are ekphrastic poems, Triptych. And I'll read you two short sections. I don't want to read the whole thing. Triptych, Arrival. In Cranganore, cuckoos anchor the day, bright for ivory and spices. Tusks lean whale heavy against hutment walls, luring sailors from Palestine via Yemen. Odor of fish hangs heavy. In a white dress, her shoulders caressed by sea wind, she leans against a stack of logs, watching immigrants in ochre robes navigate past basking cows and dogs to carry out business, gesturing with their hands. Beyond coconut trees and elephants, in the port, wives wait with their babies for their husbands. Another exile. Oh, the sea turns a deep blue, the blue of urgency. We don't despair. The sea has rescued us from the Portuguese, torching our homes in Cranganore, beaching us here on Cochin sands. Gifts pour in. We draw stars on wet mud, follow footprints of the Raja's men from the palace to our homes. Later, Ma Navu al-Haharim, how beautiful upon the mountains, rocks us to sleep. So one of the most memorable moments for me when I was a child growing up there was when my father, who was very much involved with the Jewish community, invited then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, to the 400th anniversary of the Paradesi synagogue. So the Paradesi synagogue was built by the Jews who came from Spain after the Spanish Inquisition. And so I'll end with this poem, Inauguration of the 400th Anniversary of the Cochin Synagogue, 1968. It was a long sojourn, but within this frame, hanging in my parents' living room, time is frozen in black and white. The garland's ivory glistens in my father's hands as he lifts it towards Indira Gandhi. She holds out her hands to receive it, smiling at him. Amma stands between them, her round face composed, filled with the heaviness of celebrity. Everything needed to be in place. The smile, the distance between her sari and the Prime Minister's, her hair safely secured in a bun, Chief Elder Mr. Koder bearing the weight of history in his girth, standing beside my father. The sky is just right, no rain. I am not in this photo as I'm running in and out of the synagogue and in the courtyard behind my parents. But I know a scarlet ribbon stretches taut, ready to be snipped by royal scissors, marking 400 years of passage. Much longer, say the people, much earlier. It has been a long sojourn. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Pramila. Thank you for joining me here on this stage as we planned our little gathering here. So welcome again, and I'm going to dive into a little bit of Ben Israel history. So we're going to go back much further than the time Pramila speaks of the Cochin Jews and the various several diasporas that involved their journey. I'm going to tell you about the first arrival, which very often people get very shocked to hear how long ago that was. So I'm going to talk about 175 BCE. So that makes it 2,000 years since my ancestors were shipwrecked on the Konkan coast. And that itself is such a fascinating idea, such a mystical idea, that as a writer, it's very hard to resist taking that idea and playing with it and making more stories out of it. So if they landed there, what were their lives like? How were they welcomed? How did the villagers accept them? And what was their journey henceforth, all these years to 2,000 years till my time. So we are, we're taking a large, large streep of history here. Some of the words I'll mention in my poems is something called Shanwar Teli. And a Shanwar Teli means a Saturday oil presser. They mainly became oil pressers in the Konkan villages. And one of the theories is that possibly their tribe already knew that trade when they came, and so it's possible that the villagers, they became mainly oil pressers. So Shanwar meaning Saturday, so they observed the Shabbat, they did not work on Shabbat. So along these villages, these people settled and spread. Many of them took the names of their villages, so many of them became the Kur at the end of their names. And they were actually somewhere down the line when they were discovered, much later. There were Cochini Jews who came to meet them because they had no idea that these strange villagers existed. But then they realized that, yes, they were of Jewish origin. So I'm going to read a few poems. There are several theories about their arrival. The main mythology is connected to the shipwreck. That's 175 BCE. Then there's 70 CE with the fall of the Second Temple, right, in Jerusalem. And then finally, the 10th century among the soldiers and shipmen of King Solomon, because they did a lot of trade with India. There are documents that show that King Solomon imported ivory, monkeys, peacocks, spices. So perhaps that could be one theory. And another theory that the historians talk about is a possible arrival between the 5th and 6th century from Arabia and possibly Persia. So there are several theories. But as a writer, I was attracted naturally to the shipwreck one. And most Ben Israel seem to embrace that story. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a short poem called The Angels of Konkan, because there's a cemetery at this particular village in Maharashtra. And they believe that that is a cemetery that those graves were the graves of the very first ancestors who died there. The Angels of Konkan. Sorry. Naugaon, Maharashtra is where it is believed the ancestors of the Ben Israel were shipwrecked and where a ruined cemetery exists today. And for those of you who are writers who like to know about form, this poem is in couplets, alternating couplets, but there are also short asides, like little questions. We talked about questions and conflict, so this creates a little bit of texture and question and answer in the poem. From tumbled sands and shattered bark, blurred shadows dragged us. Where were we? They dried our battered bodies, bound our wounds, clothed us in woven cotton, fed us warm food with their hands that we could not name then. And as Elijah ate of the bread and flesh the ravens gave him, so also we ate and drank of the cool water brought from brooks. Who were these healers? Then in fields of grass near the sea, we buried our dead, the ones we found. Where are they now? Set gravestones to remember, then let us pray as we wished, and giving thanks to Adonai, learn the craft of oil pressers. Or did our tribe know it already? We ate what our laws permitted, and praising this vast green land, its rich soil, its rivers, its carts, its grains, its fish and fowl, we blessed the hearts and the living hands of the villagers who saved us. So this is a little poem, imagination as well as gratitude towards them not being hostile towards the survivors. The next poem I'm going to read is the title poem, Sweet Malida. Very often people ask me, why did you choose this poem? And as the title, because I think it sort of symbolizes a sweetness in the story of our ancestors. The dish is actually called Malida, which is just poha, dried fruits, as the poem will show you. Sweet as an adjective, but also the essence of sweetness. Sweet Malida, a mix of water softened, flattened rice, sugar, dried fruits, and nuts, was the dish made for Shabbat or for breaking our fasts. Cooling, light on the palate and to the body and the spirit, it was welcome in the heat of day or night. We had many foods in common with our Muslim, Christian, and Hindu neighbors, and we often celebrated together their festivals or ours. I relished particularly fresh coconut, the regional staple, its milk or its flesh added to almost every dish. But this was to me the best way to eat it, finely grated by my mother's hands, left unsweetened, sprinkled haphazardly on the malida, a fleck of stubborn brown kernel here or there that sometimes crunched in the teeth like sand, and you winced and you swallowed it, knowing there was no simpler or purer or truer form than that. Thank you, thank you. And there are a lot of food poems in this book, so those of you who enjoy food will have quite an interesting journey. I hope you will read them. I'm going to read probably my last poem, but I'll see if there's a little bit of time. So the next poem I'm going to read is about halwa. I think every corner of the world, every corner of India has a different style and form of halwa. So I I saw my grandmother and my mother make this. And then, of course, I looked up some of the steps. But it is such an arduous process because you have to soak the wheat for 3 days and drain the water. And then you squeeze what is called the chick, the sticky ooze that comes out, the resin from the wheat grain. And the form I chose for this poem is called a pantum. The Malaysian form, we call it a pantum in the US. We like using form. And it's a repetitive form. So the first and third line of each stanza are repeated. And then right at the end, you flip the lines completely, the first 2 lines. Anyway, you'll hear it. It's in the music of the poem. And this particularly uses coconut milk because the Ben Israel substituted all milk and dairy for their products because they did not mix meat and dairy. So a lot of their dishes adapted it that way. Pantum for chick cha halwa. Whose hands worked hard to make this halwa? Whose hands soaked the mounds of wheat? How we waited 3 days and nights. How chick was extracted from grain. Whose hands soaked the mounds of wheat, knew each step of the recipe, how to squeeze the chick from grain, to slowly boil the thick beads of juice. Did they learn each step of the recipe from a new culture, from a new land, to slowly boil the thick beads of juice? Did they miss loved ones left behind? From a new culture, from a new land, did they taste their ancestors' food? Did they miss loved ones left behind? And those lost in the deluge, shipwrecked? Did their tongues taste their ancestors' food? Was this so different from sweets of home? Those lost in the deluge and wreck would never come back to life. So very different from sweets of home. Sugar, coconut milk, colored pink, thickening. Those lost in the deluge, shipwrecked. Would their spirits whisper old recipes? Sugar, rose-tinted coconut milk thickening, tired arms, bated breath, silky cubes cooling. Do spirits whisper old recipes in a new land, new life, new history? Tired arms, bated breath, silky cubes cooling, sprinkled with poppy seed, slivered nuts. New land, new life, new history, food and ways you made your own, sprinkled with poppy seed, slivered nuts. How we waited, how we waited. The food and ways you made your own, your hands working hard to make this halwa. Thank you. So this is also a tribute to the women, the grandmothers and the mothers in our families who carry these traditions. And so the hands themselves become symbols of culture, symbols of feeding, of nourishment, and handing down traditions to us from our ancestors. So this is also a tribute to the women and the grandmothers in our family. This book has several sections. There's short prose in the book, as well as a long poem right down the center of the book called Leaf Boat. And it's in fragments. It traces not just my migration to America, but also my grandfather, who was a doctor, a captain in the British Army, who was sent to Egypt and Palestine in World War I. Stories of my grandmother Hannah and my grandfather Aaron. But what I want to do is I just want to end with perhaps just the last two stanzas, fragments from this long poem called Leaf Boat. So I'm just going to read very briefly, and I want to thank you all for coming, my family, my husband John, friends, and other people who love literature. Thank you so much for being here. And Pramila, thank you for sharing the stage with me. Two ships wrecked, thank you, I'll just end with this. Two ships wrecked on the Konkan coast. What star, what moon saved them? Who drowned in salt? Who breathed the sand? Who flailed, who flew, who fell? Who swam, who dived? Whose eyes turned to pearls? Who sang to the angels of the deep? Who lived to ask the whales the story of how they were swept to shore? In my dream, the whales are singing. Check the dorsal. This is how we identify migrants. My ancestors once, a village on the Konkan coast. The third eye is the unsleeping captain of the dark. Look up. Did David's star keep them alive? Shabbat lights flicker in villages. The anchor. Oh, see, it is lifting. Oh, where to now? I am so tired. I am so tired. See, the stars are forming strange new words. A map, a compass, and you beside me. My body, a leaf boat, lamp floated on water. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much. Such an honor to be here. Thank you, Bangalore Literary Fest. Any questions? Maybe one question before we end? Yeah? Any thoughts, comments? Welcome. The back of my book has a bibliography and a lot of explanations and references, so I hope you'll read it.
I also want to let you know that I have both my books, a few copies of We Are Not a Museum with me, and Exile is Not a Foreign Word is available in the bookstore.
And I have a few postcards for you. Any questions, thoughts?
It's
Yes,
actually
please.
not a question.
Sure.
I'm from Cochin.
Yes.
I love the Jewish synagogue, which I've
Yes.
visited
Pardesi.
several times.
Yes, the Pardesi.
Yes. And very nice of both of you to bring back all those memories.
Thank you.
Thank you, and all the very best to both.
Thank you, thank you. I want to mention something that besides the Pardesi synagogue, around the corner, there are two much older synagogues that are not talked about,
Yes,
which are
true.
the actual Malabari Jewish ones.
Yes.
So I tell everybody who goes there,
Yeah.
please ask for the other synagogues as well, because
Right.
Pardesi synagogue gets the spotlight.
Yes, it's in the limelight.
So I always say, please check out the other older ones behind
Yes,
them,
we
which are
had-
truly Malabari synagogues.
Yeah, I want to mention that in my book, I talk about the Tegumbagam
Yes.
synagogue,
Tegumbagam,
which is in
Tevambagam.
Ernakulam.
That's
and
right.
I think it's very important
There are
to
two
look at
there, yeah.
those, and also some of the politics between the Malabari Jews and
And
the
It's my
Paradesi
birthplace,
Jews.
and I enjoyed listening to both.
Thank you
of
so
them.
Thank you.
much.
Thank you very
all
much.
for coming, and I hope you will read more. I have some postcards that I can give a few people here. So, but please head over to the bookstore. I'd be happy to talk. We'd both be happy to talk with you.